All right, great. This is going to be good because now I'll be able to cover some stuff here on this video, and you'll be able to access it anytime you want. And we can have all of our face-to-face time on Thursdays to discuss things. The thing that we want to do, the thing that we want to do in class, because you don't want to hear me reading PowerPoint slides to you. So you see the PowerPoint slide behind me, and this is one of the few cases where I am small. I am 6.5 feet tall, as you know from seeing me, but I'm only down in the right-hand corner there of your PowerPoint. And of course you have the PowerPoints available, but I want to make sure that you can see them while I'm talking about them. So here we are at Module 3 of our course, and so we're probably going to spend the next 2 periods discussing this. And so there'll be two pieces. This discussion of Module 3 will be in 2 pieces, about an hour length in each. And we'll be discussing the things that are true indisputably, and some other things that are stylized facts that may or may not be true, but are widely perceived to be true. So that's going to be in the background as we progress in the course later on and decide what our vision is. And by the way, after this module, as per a suggestion by one of your classmates, I want each of you to develop a vision of transformation or tinkering or subtle change to make the system perform at a much higher level. Or maybe you think that it is performing as well as it can, and you might want to say, hey, the vision exists as is. Either way, that's going to be something we do after the completion of this module. Maybe we'll do that in place of the question that I post. At least one of the next 2 weeks we'll probably do that. All right, so one of the things that we have to keep in mind, and I think virtually everybody agrees on, is the fact that kids are not all the same. They learn by different methods. Some learn better online. Some learn better face-to-face. Some learn by some face-to-face methods, not by others. And so we have to do something to address that diversity. Also, in terms of the diversity, some are bored to tears by discussing of reading, writing, and arithmetic in certain examples. But if you use other examples, the one that I keep coming back to just because people can understand it is sports, not athletics, sports, then some kids will pay more attention than they otherwise would, and they'll learn their 3 R's, among other things, better than they otherwise would. So pedagogy, thematics, online, face-to-face, all of those things come up as things that affect children differently and help them learn, or in some cases hinder their ability to learn. So we have to do something within any school system to address the diversity of children. Our current system addresses it with giant schools that have lots and lots of choices within them. And we wouldn't be here, or at least I wouldn't be presenting this material to you, if that was working well. Also, we have educators are diverse. They can succeed by presenting certain things in certain ways. If asked to present other things in different ways, other than the way that they're strong at, then they can seem ineffective. So the trick is to put educators together where the strengths of the educators match the ways in which children can be engaged in learning. All right, number 3 on our list of stylized facts and accepted truths is the notion that we'd better understand how the political process actually works. Not the high school civics version of everybody's working together to figure out something, but the real version of not everybody's paying attention and it's very competitive, and some people will trash other people if necessary to win a vote or achieve a policy. As you know that from watching campaign commercials, the commercials can be pretty nasty. They're not always full of information about how candidates differ. And another aspect that you see there on your screen is this notion of an overextended electorate. Not a lot of folks out there have given much attention to the notion that the political process can work less well because we expect too much of it. Have a look at that essay that I posted on that, showing that we have way too much stuff that we're supposed to provide political accountability to, way more than most people are likely to provide accountability. And once you have political accountability, what that actually means is that somebody above, not physically probably, although they often give themselves the penthouse suite, but by top-down objective accountability, we mean that somebody somewhere else is going to quantify some things that the system is doing, that's happening in the classroom, and they're going to base whether they reward or punish, if they do, based on those numbers. So there'll be formulas and other measured items that will be the basis for public authorities to potentially exercise authority. And what I'm hinting at when I say potentially is the notion that much accountability is promised but not actual. You'll see that in some of your readings. And then we have to understand the market a little bit better than perhaps we do. It's folks out there pursuing self-interest. There's no doubt about that. That creates some equity concerns because it seems like some folks are more successful than others at pursuing self-interest, maybe so successful that they have a monopoly in something, and so it's not competitive enough. Maybe the information isn't adequate for people to make informed competitive choices. And on the positive side, we need to understand that in a market, we have subjective accountability to consumers, which means that the folks at the bottom, by voting with their feet, maybe, if they can, if it's competitive or potentially competitive, reward or punish the producers based on what they do and how they do it, based on who they take their business to. All right, here's our list of readings. Again, you can see those in your learning module as well as in these PowerPoints. So I won't belabor that here on this recording. Again, please read the short ones absolutely, positively, definitely before class so we have some substantial basis for discussion. All right, moving on to the next slide. The man who got me into this business, or at least this area of economics, is Myron Lieberman, and his last work, he just passed away a few months ago at a very old age. His last work, The Educational Morass, published in 2007, is a must-read. I've assigned some snippets for it from this course. Try to read the whole thing someday. If you can, you'll enjoy it. You'll learn from it. One of the important points that Mike Lieberman makes is that change is very hard to affect, very hard to realize, because the cloud is dispersed, and there are many veto points. In other words, places where change can be stopped. And with the overextended electorate, participation in the political process is even more biased to producer interests than ever by having too much politics on the plate. You see, the reason for that is if we have so many things to vote on, so many things that we're allegedly going to be informed about and understand enough to cast a wise vote on, and we can't possibly do them all, where are we most likely to concentrate what little political accountability is going to come from our actions? Well, it follows that if anything that we do for a living is affected by politics, that we're going to give attention there. So, for example, the teacher unions and the principals association and so on tend to vote in school board elections at a much higher rate than they vote in other elections. And they tend to be a very disproportionate part of the electorate in what tends to be a very low voter turnout election. And so the folks elected to the school board in many cases are very reliant on the votes of the people that they supposedly hold to account for the effectiveness of their effectiveness as educators. So that's been shown periodically to be hope triumphing over experience. For example, in collective bargaining states, Texas is not one, but in collective bargaining states, it's often well known that former teacher union officials elected to the school board are sitting across the table from the folks that they're negotiating with. It doesn't take too much thinking about that to realize that that's not exactly a situation likely to promote the general public interest. Diane Ravitch's 1995 article, Adventures in Wonderland, is an excellent read. I've assigned it because what it shows is the vast difference between the naive perception of political accountability and action and what really happens behind closed doors with relatively few people paying attention. Ms. Ravitch, Professor Ravitch, was a Assistant Secretary of Education in the first George Bush administration in the late 80s, early 90s. And she concluded after a few years of frustration mostly that at the federal level, and I doubt this is a whole lot different at the state level, but that the policy is driven by special interests through congressional staff representing those interests. Why? In order to secure political support directly and indirectly for their bosses, the congressmen and women. One of the things that Peterson points out is that we've tried different versions of top-down accountability, and it's just so narrow and so convoluted and such a small part of most politicians' portfolio that it's basically been shown many times, not just by Peterson, to be an act of futility in terms of actually transforming the nature of public schooling. And of course the regulation doesn't affect just public schooling, but that's what it directly addresses. Another good read that I've assigned is John Peixota's article in the publication Veritas on the difference between top-down accountability and bottom-up accountability to clients. He points out that top-down accountability by nature can count far less than clients who can exercise subjective accountability and basically take account of everything, including whatever data happen to exist that is the basis for the top-down accountability. Because I've noted a couple times now, there is significant anecdotal evidence on severe narrowing of the curriculum as we've introduced these top-down accountability-based tests on reading, math, and science, which means not everything. So for example, in order to look better on those tests, more time is spent on reading, good. More time is spent on math, good. More time is spent on science, good. And more time is spent on test-taking skills. I guess that's a life survival skill at some point for some of those kids. So, okay, not too bad, except for the opportunity cost. Remember, this is, after all, an economics course, so we do have to talk about the big three: opportunity cost, supply and demand, and marginal analysis, marginal benefits and costs from time to time. There are only so many minutes in a school day. If we spend more time on reading, good. Spend more time on math, more time on science, that leaves less time for other things. So less time on social studies, less time on history, and less time on sports, athletics, other things that kids might do in order to look better on those tests. And the track record of top-down accountability suggests some need, including the narrowing of curriculum. By the way, the anecdotal evidence includes statements by the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, current Secretary of Education. He's noted on a number of occasions that schools are narrowing what it is that they teach in order to look better on the test. So think about this. If the test scores, at least at the national level, the National Assessment for Education Progress, the NAEP, if those are not going up, even though we're spending more time on the tested subjects, supposedly, and on the test-taking skills, and less time on the other things, so the things we're measuring are not looking much better, if at all, and at the same time the things we're not measuring are getting less and less time in the classroom, so they're probably not getting better and maybe worse. So what's being measured is looking like it's fairly constant, and what's not being measured is probably suffering. So overall things are probably getting a little bit worse, even as we spend more and more money on the subject, on teaching. For accountability to clients to exist, as it says here on the slides, the judgments of those clients must impact school operators' financial viability. So what does that exactly mean? That means that it's one thing to say, okay, the clients matter, and a lot of people say, oh, parents can raise Cain at the school and pressure principals and teachers to do things. Yes, sort of up to a point. You know, the state test is still going to be taught, and the books are still going to be the same. That's not going to change. Those all are political decisions. The kids are still going to be assigned there based on where they lived, all that stuff that I've mentioned in the roots of the problem. So yeah, parents can be influential. Parental involvement is good, but they can't impact the school operator's financial viability. In other words, if you leave your assigned public school, your property tax money is still going to go to the district. They can still allocate it to that school. And more than likely, somebody else will take your place if necessary. In that school, the area is more than likely growing, especially in Texas. The attendance zones periodically have to be redrawn so that schools are not overcrowded. So your choices as a parent, to the extent that you have any in the current system, do not affect public school operators' financial viability. And so that's just a general truism of subjective accountability to clients. Their decision to leave must affect how much money you have to spend, or the footloose nature of the customers isn't going to be given that much attention. Think about that in regard to charter public schools. Most of them are full with long wait lists. That means that if anybody leaves, that has absolutely no impact on the school operator's financial viability, because someone fills in from the wait list almost immediately. So the school stays full and the amount of money coming in stays the same. There are many viable alternatives. Vouchers, tuition vouchers that are large relative to the amount spent public school students, tuition tax credits, education savings accounts. There are many viable potential policy alternatives. The things that I've just listed are not widely used, but there are many that they exist where 1/nth of the school funding, and being the number of students, is lost, or close to that amount is lost when a student leaves. Okay? So it's possible to create subjective accountability to clients that is in fact meaningful and impactful, because students leaving will reduce the finances of the school. Now, some people might wonder, well, why would we want that? Isn't that pretty disruptive? Well, certainly. I mean, that's a disruptive in any private sector enterprise, but it gets your attention. So in most cases, that notion of getting your attention is seen to be more important than the inconvenience that may result from having to tighten your belt until you figure out how to regain your competitiveness. So back to this notion of subjectivity and objectivity. The client's subjective assessments of what the school is doing will give pause to educator choices to focus more time on subjects that are tested or for whatever reason, and versus things that are not tested, whereas there's virtually no consequences for doing that in terms of finances. In a public school where more time on tested subjects is not going to make the school look worse by having less time on untested subjects, is not going to cause them any loss of money by someone leaving for a charter school, for example, or for a private school, because less is being covered and more time is being spent on test prep. Now, you've heard me many times repeat this phrase, one size does not fit all, but still, it's just the nature of the political process that there's an overwhelming bias towards uniformity. Part of that is just more convenient. It's easier to manage. So in that sense, at least for that reason, it's probably inherent in political control. But even more important is that the appearance of fairness is paramount in the political process for anything, not just education. Because there's just no defense from the claim by a constituent or by somebody that, hey, why does Joe's school have X? And Joe's in our district or in our state. I don't have X. I can't have that. Why can't we have, we pay the same taxes. That looks pretty bad. And so anything that's being made available to anybody, in most cases, it's more than trivial, has to be made available to everybody. So what you end up with is attendance areas, which all have big schools, to the extent that population density allows that, have big schools that have lots and lots of stuff in them to try to address the diversity of the children that invariably exist within any geographic boundary. Lots of folks, not just me, are constantly saying one size does not fit all. Yeah, and by the way, we'll also say that schools are too big, but still what happens is we build one school, we build big schools in an effort to find a big size in which something in there seems to fit nearly everybody. Still means we have to teach most of the same things in the same way to everybody, even though that is known to produce a low rate of engagement and thus success in learning the material. So we have what an author 20-something years ago now has called, and I've called it that consistently in my work, what are called comprehensively uniform schools. These big neighborhood public schools that contain lots of options within them. The gentleman's name is Professor Brown, I forget his first name, 1992 article. And he claims that even though people differ widely, they prefer traditional public schools to because it makes life simpler for them. It makes it possible for them to send their kid to a school that has everything in there that the child might want. Maybe they're not even sure exactly what will engage their child in learning. I would argue that parents understand their children better than anybody else does, although maybe not perfectly, especially for younger children. They haven't discovered the child's strengths and weaknesses and which pedagogies they learn best by. And so they want a giant school, and Johnny will find his way in there. They want to avoid complex school decisions where they have to choose among specialized alternatives, kinds of things that I've been arguing for. So they want all the choices for anyone available on each campus. I don't agree with Professor Brown's conclusion, but you might. It's something we certainly want to discuss online. Powell, in an outstanding book, incredibly, Powell and his co-authors, way back in 1998, 1985, were already starting to figure this out. And Lydia Siegel in 2004 wrote about fraud being rampant in our giant schools. And it's a good read. I've assigned some material from at least Powell. I don't recall if I've assigned much from Siegel. It's in your bibliography. Another good read if you get a chance. They describe some major problems other than just the fact that that one size doesn't fit all, even if there are a lot of sizes all in one building. A lot of problems with these mega schools. Hard to manage. We went over some of that in the first learning module. Hard for parents to figure out whether Johnny's in a real classroom or one that's fluff, just based on the title. Okay. Now, once we have these attendance areas, a neighborhood traditional public school, certainly if we have a big attendance area, we can differentiate and specialize within the school, but the schools themselves have to be pretty much doing the same things in total. So that means as long as we can cling to the notion that children should be assigned to a school, all the schools have to be pretty much the same in terms of the total amount of things that they offer. For the schools to significantly differ, it would require sometimes controversial choices and politically incorrect admissions selectivity. By that I mean that something financed by tax dollars is usually seen as something that should be open to all. And so that would make it kind of hard to specialize in something. For example, if someone nearby, maybe a careless parent or somebody that believed that Johnny was good at something or should be, enrolled him in a school that specialized in something that Johnny was not actually interested in or had no aptitude for, or maybe the school is for gifted and talented kids, and well, the parent imagines that, oh, by golly, Johnny must be gifted and talented. I want him to be. Certainly all their parents want to believe that they're the parents of rocket scientists in the making, and so they send him to a school where he does not fit in because, in fact, he learns differently from the school's preferred mission-based pedagogy, or maybe he isn't a high-functioning student in the general sense that's somewhat rare. Remember, I allege with considerable evidence that most children are not uniformly high or low or even medium functioning, that they have strengths and weaknesses, but maybe there is room for gifted and talented schools in general where Johnny does have to be high functioning in all areas, and if he's not going to fit in there very well. And so if the school doesn't know how to have the ability to reject those kind of applicants, because that's seen as politically incorrect, that will make it very difficult for that school to pursue its mission with all these distractions in each classroom of children that are not up to speed with those that want to progress at a faster rate, perhaps with more challenging material. I've encountered this many times at the various sessions that I go to. Quite often somebody says, why don't, and that, by the way, this is consistent with our theme for Module 2. Why don't we find something that works and copy it? Why don't we find best practices? That's what I mean by a silver bullet, something that just works for everybody. Not going to happen. But because we assign children to a school based on where they live, I mean, we want to find best practices that work for close to 100% of the children. Again, not going to happen. That's why I call it a futile search. And by golly, my colleague and friend Rick Hanushek wrote an article a few years ago entitled, "What if there are no best practices?" Indeed. Certainly there are some great practices, some things that work really well for a large subgroup of children, but probably not a whole lot of things that are best practices for them all. And because we keep searching for these various best practices, either administratively or pedagogically or thematically, we keep running into crashing failures, which, for example, happened on two coasts by the same authors, the same purveyors of the material. Diane Ravitch points out their failures in her 2010 book, Death and Life of School Systems. And yet another silver bullet, although I'll tell you from a meeting that I had early August up in Dallas, I'm starting to think that this is more of a silver bullet than I ever believed it to, but I'm still going to stay a skeptic and believe that no matter how good the software gets, that we're not going to be able to differentiate instruction enough just online for that to work for all of the kids, but probably for a higher percentage of children than I used to believe. Some kids are still not going to be comfortable learning stuff through a computer. They're going to need a human being to instruct them and or to at least lead them through the electronic instruction. Probably, at least for now, until the software gets even better, but maybe forever, the notion of online versus not online, or some sort of a blend of the two, there's more and more blended learning, will be just another specialization issue. It's just another thing that should be, in a big way, on the menu of schooling options for folks, specifically parents, maybe with the advice of educators, to select something that works best for one or more of their children, which, by the way, is an important concept that I just wrote a blog piece about. Parents in our Edgewood district, a few years ago, from 1998 to 2008, they had a tuition voucher available to them through private funding. Some of the parents, even though they could have applied for vouchers for all of their children, only applied for vouchers for some of their children, indicating that, hey, seems to be working well for some of my kids, right? It being the assigned Edgewood Independent School District assigned school, that it's not working very well for some of my other kids in school, and for them I want a voucher because I know there's a private school out there that'll work better for them. All right, so and in some cases that was online instruction. So software-driven instruction is going to be big. It's already big. It'll become bigger as school choice becomes more and more, hopefully, part of our school system. And one of the authors that's written about online calls it disruptive in a good way, because it may force other useful transformations. It's disruptive in a good way, according to Professor Christensen and his colleague Michael Overdorf, in the sense that it's hard to argue against using technology where it fits student learning styles. And at the same time, as we fail to argue against it, for those who are reform resistant, more and more other things get their foot in the door. And so that's what we mean by disruptive. More and more things happen because we allow for certain changes to occur, and then that disrupts how we've been doing things, and then other things can occur that otherwise would not have been feasible in a political administrative sense. Okay, now here's a hot issue popping up on this slide. Is schooling somehow different in a way that says, nearly everything should be done privately through markets, but no, not schooling. No, it's different It's just not compatible with this notion that it should be driven by profit and loss and by changes in prices, where higher prices signal increased profit potential in many cases, and so that'll attract folks, and then others will just innovate totally new things, for example, maybe a sports-based curriculum, and then suddenly they'll discover that it's very popular and they'll raise their prices, and then that will cause other people to copy them, and that'll bring the prices back down to just barely where they cover costs. Is schooling different so that this process cannot work at least better than the political process, if not perfectly, or much better, maybe at least a little better in most cases? Or is that not going to happen, and there are good reasons to keep it in the government sphere, price controlled, centrally planned, things that have not worked well for anything else and are not working right now for schooling? But maybe if schooling is different enough from your typical market setting, that we better figure out how to make the central planning, price controlled, politically driven schooling work, because it will work even less well in a market setting. So let's explore some of these reasons that people have alleged why schooling is different. Before we do that, let me just make a quick sidebar here, and that's the notion of schooling versus education. Children need an education, absolutely, but not necessarily schooling. And so we're talking about school system reform because most kids, probably because their parents don't want to homeschool, will be placed in a school. So we need a school system, which means a mixture of public and private schools addressing diverse children through diverse educators. But education does not necessarily have to mean schooling for everybody. Schooling can and does occur and should occur to some extent, at least, from the school of hard knocks, from experience. And so let's keep open to the fact that many things can and will and perhaps should happen through informal arrangements and not all through formal arrangements called schools. Okay, that said, what are some of the reasons that schooling is different from a traditional private sector product? Number one, I've listed it as A, is the product is namely student intellectual development. The desired outcome occurs through what is called co-production. Educators can instruct up a storm, and it does no good whatsoever unless the student is engaged. The production of knowledge, of skill, occurs through a cooperation, co-production, between educators and students. Okay, so maybe that means that we can't just go up to the counter like we do for a product and say, I want X, and then X is put on the counter and there it is. Maybe the cooperative nature of the production of what's being purchased or produced requires government control of it. Maybe. We'll get into some of the pro and con of it. For now, we just want to explain the items on the list. For most private goods, perhaps the vast majority, the purchaser derives all the benefit from consuming the good. Well, that's not the case with education. There are public benefits, third-party spillover benefits from someone getting smarter, from somebody acquiring skills. Not all the skills that they acquire, but from many of them. Okay, so for example, as it says in the slide, improved citizenship and social cohesion is a benefit to the general public from any given individual becoming better educated. And then there are equity concerns, the notion that the ability to pay should not fully drive access to this product called intellectual development. And back to the notion of Professor Brown's belief that folks didn't want to have schools that were diverse, that they wanted that diversity to be available everywhere to them through comprehensively uniform schools, that schooling is a complicated purchase. And because of that, it's likely to foster poor decision-making in a private setting. And then there's the notion that, hey, profit and loss means bankruptcy in some cases. And wow, that's kind of disruptive, is to have kids in a school and suddenly, poof, you walk up to the school one day and it's not even, I mean, it may physically still be there, but it may be closed all of a sudden, or maybe not quite as bad. It was there one year and then the next year you plan to enroll in it and by golly, it's gone. Okay, so the disruptiveness of that. All right. Now, before we get into directly addressing some of these issues, although this does pertain to one of those indirectly, and you'll hear this frequently from a lot of folks, and especially educators. And well, schooling is not suitable for markets because because schooling is a public good, and so I guess they've had enough economics to know that public good is a source of market failure. And by the way, failure doesn't mean abject failure. That term is a rather a poor choice by my fellow economists. It means failure to be efficient in the sense that it's totally efficient. There are no possible gains from reallocation left. That's what public market failure means, is there's no further efficiency gains from reallocating resources. Well, that's probably true almost everywhere. But more specifically, what do I mean when I say what's on the slide there, that schooling is not a public good? Well, we have specific definitions. So this is not a matter of opinion. This is a matter of fact, a matter of definition. Schooling is not a product that matches the definition of a public good, at least not beyond the level of filling up a classroom. So for example, if there are 20 seats in a classroom and there are only 15 students in it, and someone else walks in the room and now there's 16, does that affect my costs or the university's costs or anybody's costs to deliver the instruction that I'm delivering? No. But beyond that limited notion of additional consumption can occur without any additional cost up to the size of the classroom, schooling is not a public good because it doesn't meet the definition that you see there on your slide. We can exclude people from it if they don't pay. That's not true for real public goods like national defense. If you're in the United States, you will be protected by our defense apparatus, whether you paid your taxes or not. Okay? So non-exclusive is what a public good is. You can't exclude non-payers, and you can't exclude, I didn't say you should or you'd want to, but it's perfectly possible to say you can't come into school unless you pay your tuition. Happens all the time at private schools. And then there's the notion of the costless sharing, the defense example that I gave. Beyond a classroom setting, it's not true. Additional students mean additional cost. All right, so what is schooling if it's not a public good and there are all these public benefits that arise from providing it? Well, schooling is still a private good because you can't exclude non-payers and because there is not costless sharing. Additional output, additional customers means additional cost. What schooling is a merit good. See, so that still sounds good. Yeah, you're not going to trash somebody when they say it's not a public good. You're not saying something nasty. You're saying something that's about a definition. Merit sounds good, and it is exactly that. A merit good is a private good, one from which you can exclude people if they don't pay, and one for which there is not costless sharing. It's a private good that yields spillovers to the general public. It yields benefits for others when someone experiences instructional growth through schooling or by any other method. Okay, so back to the list and some discussion of each of those items. The co-production issue. The desired outcome of knowledge and skill acquisition is the combined result, as I said, of instruction and engagement in the material. And the instructor and the child need to be actively engaged in production, and that's not the same as most private goods where you just order it and it's provided to you. Even most services are just rendered to you, and you're not actively involved in producing it. But does that mean that schooling is in any sense meaningfully different in a sense that means that the government needs to be involved in producing it? Maybe not necessarily for everybody, but it needs to be involved in regulating it or providing it through public schools. Now I would argue no. I would argue that the co-production aspect of schooling means that customization and differences in children need to be recognized even more than they can be in a political setting. And so if anything, co-production means that private production, at least to a significant extent, maybe not for all the children, is especially important, not necessarily through profit-seeking ownership. There are things called nonprofits Sometimes the profit-seeking ownership helps because it provides a basis for investment. But sometimes the profit motive is not a positive thing. Many people think that the profit motive is unseemly because people are trying to make money and gasp, making money off of children. That seems especially unseemly to some people. But as long as there's enough competition, profit-seeking, all that means is that somebody called a manager will get something approximating, or the owner will get something approximating a normal rate of return on their investment, which means, in many cases, a normal rate of return on their time spent on this. So it's not somebody reaping big bucks in a competitive setting, but maybe in an insufficiently competitive setting. Or with price control, the profit motive might be seen as a negative. Okay, so I jumped ahead a little bit of this slide. The counter-argument, or one of the counter-arguments to the notion that co-production means that schooling is different and therefore not suitable to market delivery, is that we need as much customization as possible in order to engage diverse children in learning. And the higher the population density, the more feasible it is to differentiate schooling. And assignment, as noted previously, does not yield either the customization, because it's impossible to have different schools in different attendance areas, or the desired attitudes from either half of the co-production setting. So, for example, what I mean by assignment is what it says in parentheses, force. So if we force a child to attend a school because their parents can't afford any of the alternatives that have to be paid for out of pocket in addition to taxes, you create some negativity there. And if you put educators in a classroom where they're not feeling comfortable because maybe it's an out-of-field teaching issue, or simply because the kids in there are not sorted in any way that helps them be more effective, you have already a situation in which co-production is hindered. So freedom may be especially critical to co-production, and because of that, one of the items that I assigned you is that Cato article with mentioned earlier, listed earlier, but here again with the URL to click. All right. Here's the notion that hey, schooling is supposed to help the general public, help the country work better, and parents, by golly, they're just going to be focused on the well-being of their children, and they're not going to be interested in paying, if they have to, for their kids to be better citizens and for them to get along better with people from other backgrounds. They're just going to want to focus in on buying schooling that helps their kids be more successful economically. And because of the public interest in the content of schooling, that's just not okay for schooling. Well, the first answer to that is, hey, you know, if for other reasons the private provision works better for some kids, you can do some regulation of content. And then there's the issue of, well, okay, all this citizenship stuff and social cohesion stuff may be important, but if the classroom is low functioning for reasons listed in your roots of the problem and reasons we've discussed, what difference does it make if the schooling that's aimed at that is included in a public setting but not in a private one, if it's taught badly to most of the kids or ineffectively to most of the children? And then there's the issue of, well, what is it exactly that matters most to social cohesion and the ability to participate in the political process? E.G. West, one of my heroes in this arena, argued that courses in citizenship and that sort of thing, which maybe parents would opt out of if it would save them some money on private schooling, is not really what matters most to the social cohesion citizenship issue, that opting out of such courses is likely to be small. The effect of opting out of the courses is what matters, according to West, Milton Friedman, and others, to social cohesion and political participation is just being literate and numerate. And so if people can read, they will be adequately motivated to participate at least in some political processes up to their ability to do so. Again, there's the overextended electorate issue, but at least in the arenas in which they wish to participate, which probably are the ones that are most impactful on their ability to make a living, they will have the propensity to do that and the ability to do that as long as they can read and write and process numbers in an effective way. And those are the kinds of skills that parents are going to want no matter where they take their kids to school. I mean, that's the bottom line is, hey, Johnny and Susie, you've got to be able to read, write, and process numbers, or that school does not work for me. I don't care whether it has a nice theme or pedagogy or what, or if everybody says it's great. If my kid's not learning to read, write, and do math, it's not a good school, at least not for us. And then there's the other issue regarding the notion of public provision of schooling in order to make sure that courses related to social cohesion and participation in politics are in there. It's a very contentious process deciding what should be taught in a politically correct, by definition, curriculum. And as a result, and some of you already commented on this, Matthew, for example, have commented on this from State Board of Education, it's not a pretty process how they fight over what should be in textbooks and in curricula. And the low common denominator that they seem to have agreed upon is often not pretty. There are many articles and some small books written about how terrible our textbooks are because of the need to pass political muster for them to be adopted, especially in California and Texas, the big states that the publishers tend to focus on. So as I said earlier, jumped ahead a little bit again, concerns about underconsumption of certain lessons can easily be addressed by regulation, although you might not want to, because again, regulation is a political process. And here's, as economists, all on a regular basis to keep our credentials up have to say on the one hand, on the other hand, yes, on the one hand, some parents might neglect this, but on the other hand, to regulate everybody, because what some might neglect might impose processes and content on others, politically correct, that they might prefer to do without. So E.G. West and others, I think, credibly said, and by the way, I read it recently, Thomas Jefferson said the same thing, said the number of parents that are likely to be neglectful of these sorts of things is too small to justify the regulation or the imposition on everybody else. Okay, so flipping through the slides here a little bit to kind of make a transition. I was, for a while, the director of the E.G. West Institute. That's not a big deal because we never did get a big grant to get going, but the reason that I pointed out here is because I named it after E.G. West, because he was absolutely indifferent to political correctness, as I think and hopefully I am. I have to admit I temper a few things I say and do and advocate based on what I believe their political feasibility is. But at a different level of assertiveness, E.G. West basically got himself expelled from his home country. What he said was so politically incorrect that he dared to publish it, seek to have it published in a book, and got somebody to publish it in a book that came out again 20 years ago in a third edition. This was in the 1960s. He had to leave England, move to Canada, because he was no longer in demand, among other things, in England after stating his concerns, and that's basically all he said. He said, look, here's all these things we've assumed about why schooling has to be done by the government. Education in the State was the name of his book, and they just don't hold muster. The notion that these courses are essential to kids to be conversant in politics has never been asked by anybody, just assumed, and it's a shaky assumption. And mostly it's the stuff that everybody will consume publicly or privately that matters to these issues. And then he identified some other things that are just empirical issues where he said, you know, we've been believing these things, but there are reasons to doubt it, and the only way these things can be resolved is by going out and collecting data and crunching some numbers and see where the data point. Okay, then there are the equity concerns. We're only up to C on our list. differences in income yield less equal to access to schooling in market-centric school systems. Duh, you're saying. And to some, that's utterly unacceptable. But if you force, or in some sense try to do as much as you can to force equal access to schooling, that's, use the word ugly with some trepidation, but really that's what it is. It's ugly from several perspectives. If somebody wants to spend more money on their kid for schooling, why not? For example, I have not heard of anybody arguing that we should prohibit wealthy families from sending their kid to a public school and then sending them to after school with their own money after that. So that seems unfair, and there's nothing we can do about it, and I've not heard anybody say we should do anything about it. So given that life is unfair to some extent, and that there's been no evidence pointed out that some children being able to learn more has in any way made those in lesser circumstances worse off, why not let them? And we unleash several positive factors if we maximize the growth of skills and knowledge and not worry about the gap between the most and the least advantaged. That will benefit the most and least advantaged simultaneously the most. And we will unleash several processes that are essential to move things forward. First of all, price decontrol, the notion that some things are expensive at first, and to get them to be on the menu of schooling options at all, they need to be charged at a higher level than perhaps taxpayers are willing to finance for everybody. But then those items that initially become feasible, that come into existence because of the purchases of the wealthy, eventually become standardized and cheaper and widely available to everybody. We don't want to short circuit that process by not allowing supplementation of public spending with private spending. And if we allow some to have more schooling than the taxpayer dollars otherwise provide, we have improved overall productivity of our economy, more innovation, and things that get started by the wealthy become widely available to everybody through experience and competition, as I just noted. So what I've argued, again, in this notion of, yeah, life isn't fair, and we want to make sure that everybody has a high level of schooling, but it doesn't make sense from several perspectives to deny those who want to spend even more the ability to do that. So what I've always argued is, hey, let's provide a high minimum subsidy to everybody. Let them spend it wherever they want to at publicly provided schooling or privately provided schooling. And that minimizes the advantages of wealth. Maybe they get to have the new gadgets a little sooner than everybody else, but not otherwise have too many majors. And let me just make another sidebar about the wealthy. What most of us think about as the truly wealthy are so few people that it's another one of those Jeffersonian kinds of trade. There are just not enough of them to constrict what we do for everybody by the fact that somebody that's already well off might be even better off. For example, let me give you an example of that. The last time I checked these data, the top 5% of income started at about $125,000 for a family, and 10% started well before a six-figure income. Okay, so that means that 90% of families make less than probably $90,000 a year. Okay, so let's not make schooling policy based on paranoia, based on the top 5 or 10% getting even better off, and somehow hurt the other 90% in the process. If we insist on free only, we insist that no one pay for anything that's publicly subsidized at all, we will severely shrink the menu of schooling options. Many things that could be done will at least initially cost more than the publicly funded amount. And by the way, that assumes that the full publicly funded amount per child in a traditional public school is made available through vouchers or tax credit or through education savings account made universal. And that's typically not the case. So what we're talking about when we say free only severely shrinks the menu of schooling options, we're saying that a $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 per child per year tuition voucher or tuition tax credit or education savings account severely reduces if we say, yeah, you can't spend any of your own money to top off that $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 worth of public money. That will severely shrink what can be done. However, if we allow the $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 voucher or tax credit or education savings account to be made available and then be topped off by private money, either from the families themselves or whatever they can secure on a means-tested basis from scholarship funds, we'll have a massive increase in the menu of schooling options through free enterprise. And many of those will eventually be free. As I've noted previously, many things start out expensive because they're new and there's not a lot of people with the skills to do them, and competing for those folks with skills is expensive. And so it's expensive at first, and then it becomes cheaper over time with experience and competition. And so many things that would be available would only be ever available if not free only. If free only is not the policy for all schools, will eventually become free to everybody. Some will still cost more money. It's a ritzy, fancy, expensive way to do something. And so if that's something that works especially well for a family, for a child in a family with low income, probably, and again, I predict that this will be a slam dunk, it'll be easy for him or her to get a scholarship to find the top-off money to get into that. All right, let me cut it off here for this particular slide, for this particular video, and resume with equity issues D discussion. Well, we've been discussing equity issues, so let me finish that, and then I'll stop, and then we'll pick up the second, probably about half of the learning module after I take a little bit of a break, and perhaps you'll want to pick it up another time, although if you're into it right now, go right straight to it. All right, so finally, under equity issues, which you've been talking about already, the equity notion tempers the notion of, hey, we better have it be free through all and maybe even produced through the government because it's just not working. So, how can we have equity benefits to something that isn't working well? And I would argue that little, if anything, could be worse for low-income kids than the system that we have now. Stop.